The acrid smell of burning insulation flooded the cabin, choking out the recycled air, while the overhead panels vibrated with a sickening, metallic rattle. Through the static of the open cockpit door, a military frequency bled into the public address system, cutting through the panicked screams of the passengers. Flight 229, this is Talon Actual. We track your trajectory. Is the ghost of Kandahar on board? Acknowledge. Over. Wake her up. Now. Before you watch the full story, comment below. Which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story might be even bigger. 4 hours earlier, Maya was just the tired, unremarkable girl sitting quietly in seat 7C. She looked like a college student heading home for midterms, swallowed entirely by a ridiculously oversized hand-knitted mustard yellow sweater that bundled around her waist and swallowed her wrists. She was sipping a tepid ginger ale through a thin plastic straw, her knees pulled up to her chest, trying to catch a few hours of sleep against the unforgiving curvature of the airplane wall. "Excuse me, sweetie," the senior flight attendant, a man named Richard with perfectly gelled hair and a perfectly plastic smile, tapped her shoulder with the edge of his tablet. "You'll need to tuck that little backpack completely under the seat. We wouldn't want you tripping over it if we hit a tiny bump, would we?" Maya simply nodded, pulling her arms inside the massive sleeves of the yellow sweater to push the faded canvas bag beneath the seat in front of her. She didn't bother telling him that the bag contained a heavily classified leather-bound flight logbook filled with stamps from combat zones he couldn't even point to on a map. She closed her eyes, letting the ambient drone of the twin turbofans wash over her, her mind drifting inevitably back to her grandfather's dusty, sun-baked hangar in the New Mexico desert. He had been the one to teach her how to fly before she could legally drive, wiping engine grease from his brow as he handed her a heavy torque wrench. "A machine only fails when you stop listening to its heartbeat," he had told her, a phrase that had anchored her through 2 deployments and countless close calls in the military. She had carried that philosophy into the Air Force, earning a call sign that she hadn't spoken aloud in over 3 years, burying her past under layers of civilian anonymity. The commercial Boeing 737 was cruising smoothly over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, surrounded by an ocean of pristine blue sky. The man sitting in 7 billions, a smug executive wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Maya's rent, was using a silver pocket knife to peel the skin off individual green grapes, placing the tiny skins in a neat, symmetrical circle on a white cocktail napkin. It was an oddly specific, meticulous habit that Maya noted with the passive observation of a trained scout, filing it away as irrelevant data. But beneath the clinking of his knife and the hum of the cabin, Maya's ears picked up something else. A faint, rhythmic oscillation in the pitch of the right engine, a sound so subtle it registered more as a vibration in her jawbone than a noise. That was the first stage. Then, 20 minutes later, the businessman's silver pocket knife rattled violently against his tray table, and a master caution chime pinged twice in the forward galley, prompting Richard to practically sprint up the aisle with a forced, terrifyingly calm smile. Suddenly, the nose of the aircraft dipped. Not a standard descent, but a stomach-dropping lurch that threw the entire cabin into zero gravity for a fraction of a second. The oxygen masks deployed from the ceiling with a violent hiss of pressurized gas, swinging like yellow pendulums above the terrified passengers as the PA system crackled to life with the captain's voice, thick with raw, undisguised terror. "Mayday, Mayday, Denver Center. We have a total loss of flight control computers, catastrophic hydraulic failure across all 3 systems. We are going down." Maya stared at the swinging yellow masks, feeling the familiar, icy calm of a combat adrenaline spike flood her veins. She could stay in her seat, hold her knees, and let the pilots fight a losing battle, or she could shatter the quiet, peaceful life she had fought so desperately to build. Stay with me here, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming. Would you have broken cover to save strangers, even if it cost you everything you tried to leave behind? Maya ripped the oxygen mask out of her way and unbuckled her seatbelt. Richard, the flight attendant, lunged forward from the aisle, his gelled hair now a frantic mess. "Miss, sit down immediately. You are endangering yourself and others." The grape-peeling businessman grabbed her wrist with startling force. "Are you inane?" "Sit down, you stupid girl." Maya twisted her wrist with a sharp, calculated rotation, breaking his grip instantly as her posture shifted from a slouching, tired student to a coiled spring. She shoved past Richard, sprinting the few feet to the reinforced cockpit door, and slammed her open palm flat against the metal. "Open it!" she shouted over the deafening roar of the slipstream, tearing past the fuselage. Richard grabbed her shoulder, shouting, "I am restraining you!" Just as the door cracked open on its electronic latch, revealing a terrified, sweat-drenched co-pilot peering out. "Get back to your seat!" he screamed. Maya locked eyes with him, her voice cutting through the panic with absolute, terrifying authority. "Your pitch trim actuator is jammed hard over, and you're entering a phugoid cycle because you're fighting the yoke. Disconnect the stick pusher and let me in, or we are going to bury this tube in the side of that mountain." The co-pilot blinked, momentarily paralyzed by the mathematically precise diagnosis coming from the mouth of a girl in a massive knit sweater, and subconsciously stepped back. Maya pulled the bulky mustard yellow sweater over her head, abandoning the comfortable disguise of a harmless civilian, and wrapped the thick, heavy wool around her bleeding knuckles, where she had pounded the door, using the garment as a makeshift brace as she stepped onto the chaotic, alarms-blaring flight deck. The captain was slumped sideways against the glass, unconscious from a violent head strike against the glare shield during the initial jolt, blood pooling on the center console. The co-pilot's hands were shaking so violently he couldn't maintain a grip on the thrust levers, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Maya hauled the captain out of his seat with a strength that defied her frame, sliding into the left seat and instantly kicking the heavy rudder pedals to test the dead, unresponsive weight of the control surfaces. She grabbed the radio headset, snapping the mic down to her lips. "Talon, actual. This is Ghost. I have the aircraft. Clear the airspace below flight level 200 immediately." The frequency went dead silent for 3 agonizing seconds before a stunned, breathless voice replied, "Ghost, airspace is yours. We have Black Hawks scrambling from Carson. Godspeed, Major." Maya's eyes rapidly scanned the glass cockpit displays, absorbing 1,000 data points in a single glance. "All right, kid," she barked to the weeping co-pilot. "Kill the auto throttle. Manually open the crossfeed valves and give me asymmetrical thrust. We have no hydraulics, which means we have no ailerons. We're steering this bird with the engines." She grabbed the yoke, feeling the terrifying sluggishness of the massive jet. Flaps are dead, slats are dead, landing gear is stuck in the wells. We need to maintain exactly 210 knots to prevent an aerodynamic stall, but we have no brakes. We're coming in hot. Suddenly, the right engine coughed, a massive compressor stall that sent a violent, teeth-rattling shudder through the entire airframe, dropping their right wing severely toward the jagged earth rushing up to meet them. The co-pilot choked back a sob, completely freezing, his hands hovering uselessly above the center console. Maya reached over, her bruised hand, still wrapped in the yellow wool, resting firmly over his shaking, frozen fingers on the throttle. "Hey, breathe!" she commanded, her voice dropping the military bark for a fleeting second of intense, grounded humanity. "We're just driving a very big, very broken bus. Stay with me, kid." The ground expanded aggressively in the windshield, the flat, cracked asphalt of an abandoned municipal airstrip looming out of the desert scrub. A machine only fails when you stop listening to its heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a microsecond, drowning out the blaring warning horns, feeling the deep, groaning vibration of the airframe through the floorboards, sensing the exact aerodynamic moment the crippled right wing was about to entirely lose lift. "Pull back on the left throttle, push the right, now!" she roared. The belly of the Boeing slammed into the tarmac with a concussive boom that shattered the overhead panels. Sparks engulfed the cockpit windows in a blinding waterfall of orange light as the plane skidded off the runway at 140 miles an hour, plowing mercilessly through dirt, fencing, and sagebrush before violently twisting and coming to a brutal, neck-snapping halt. The subsequent silence was heavier than the deafening alarms had been. Dust motes danced in the shafts of harsh desert sunlight, piercing the spider-webbed windshield. Maya's hands were white-knuckled, locked onto the yoke, trembling so violently from the adrenaline dump that she couldn't command her fingers to unclench. The co-pilot leaned over, unbuckled his harness, and gently pried her fingers loose one by one, tears streaming down his face as he choked on the dust. In the cabin behind them, someone let out a ragged breath, followed by a tentative, shocked clap, which rapidly dissolved into a chorus of weeping and hysterical relief. Maya stepped out of the flight deck, wiping grease and sweat from her forehead. Richard, the senior flight attendant, was pale as a sheet, his perfectly gelled hair flattened with sweat and dirt. He looked at her, his hands shaking, his voice dropping to a humbled, fragile whisper. "I am so sorry. First, thank you. Thank you." 20 minutes later, as the dazed passengers huddled under emergency blankets on the desert floor, a fleet of black military SUVs tore across the cracked asphalt, kicking up massive plumes of dust. A man in a pristine Air Force dress uniform stepped out of the lead vehicle, walking purposefully straight past the bewildered local sheriffs and paramedics. He stopped directly in front of Maya, who was sitting on a crushed aluminum panel, and snapped a crisp, razor-sharp salute. "The commander sends his regards, Major. Welcome back to the land of the living." 6 months later, the comforting smell of aviation fuel and engine grease filled a quiet, sunlit hangar in the New Mexico desert. Maya was lying on a creeper underneath a vintage single-engine Cessna, her hands covered in dark oil, the quiet, deliberate rhythm of her civilian life fully restored. Her grandfather walked in through the massive rolling doors, tossing a heavy wrench onto the wooden workbench. "They're still talking about you on the news networks," he said quietly, looking down at her boots sticking out from under the fuselage. "They're calling it a miracle, but they really don't understand what happened up there." Maya slid out from under the metal belly of the plane, wiping her hands on a rag. "Understand what?" she asked. He smiled gently, a look of profound, quiet pride in his weathered eyes. "That you didn't just save 200 people that day. You finally stopped hiding who you were meant to be." Hanging on the cinderblock wall behind them, meticulously framed behind a pane of protective UV glass, was a scorched, oil-stained, torn mustard-yellow sweater. What would you have done in her place? If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you tomorrow. A solitary beam of afternoon sunlight catching the frayed, burnt threads of a ruined yellow sweater against a cold, cinder block wall.